Thanks, Wendy. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the August Conditions and Outlooks briefing. This is the last month this year with no R's in it. I'm Tony Bergantino, Director of the Wyoming State Climate Office and the Water Resources Data System. And in addition to me and my office, this webinar is presented by the University of Wyoming Extension, USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub, the USGS Geological Survey, the Wyoming State Engineers Office, the National Weather Service in Riverton, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Bureau of Land Management. And today we'll cover the drought and climate conditions, surface water status, water rights administration, wildfire conditions and outlooks, and then Kelly Smith with the National Drought Mitigation Center will give us a detailed look at the CMOR drought system that we've talked about quite a bit on here. So we'll start her out with current conditions and the drought map. And this is the drought map released this morning. It's valid through the 15th, Tuesday. Areas outlined in green are where we've had improvements since our last webinar, and every place that had yellow or brown on the map during the last webinar is improved between then and this week, which is always nice to see. We do still have one tad of D0 up in the northwestern Teton County area, but what a change from where we were. So speaking of where we were, just a comparison here. We'll go back. We'll try to go back. This was the drought map from this morning, and look at where we were exactly almost exactly 1 year ago today. And just a quick comparison there for the 16th of August of 2022. What a difference 12 months makes. Now we'll go back to that one. This is the updated timeline showing percent of the state in each of those drought categories since the start of 2000 through the 15th. The area of state in actual drought conditions, those D1 to D4 categories that you see across the top, decreased by 0.4% since the last webinar, bringing the total area of the state experiencing drought to 0. And this is the first time since the 12th of May in 2020 when there's been no D1 or worse conditions in Wyoming. That D0 or that abnormally dry, not actual drought, but the heads up category, it's at only 0.2% of the state now. And this is the lowest that has been since about a 3-week time period from the 9th to the 29th of July in 2019. And that's when the entire state was clear of any D category whatsoever. And for those of you who like to get into the tracking of this sort of thing, prior to that period in 2019, you'd have to go back to early November of 2011 to find a time when Wyoming had less D0 than today. And these timelines are available for each of the counties if you want to take a look at them at your specific area. Zoom in, going back to the start of 2020, so you can see a little bit more granularity in the conditions here, and at this finer level of temporal detail, you can see over on the left that level of D0 in March and April of 2020, and that's greater than where we're sitting at right now here over on the far right at the present. Here's how precipitation has looked over the last 2 weeks. While the last week has been fairly dry statewide, the totals over the last 14 days are still pretty wet. These green and blue to purple colors are the areas above median, and they cover pretty much most of the state except for a few gray areas, which are right about the median. And then even some smaller areas in the yellow, which are just below median. And those are in southwestern Sweetwater, southwestern Albany counties, along with a few other minor patches around the state. We look at 90 days, going back 3 months, see a bit more of the gray, but is primarily concentrated in the southern part of Carbon County area. Sierra Madres and a bit near the Tetons are the only below median areas when you look at the state over the last 3 months. And I've gone ahead and added 2 additional sets of maps as a result of some questions we've had. This month I'd like to highlight see the variations here. Here's the calendar year to date precipitation for last year and for this year. So this is January 1st of 2022 to 16 August of 2022 on the left, and 1st of January through yesterday here on the right. And while there's some green, which is about up to 130% of average or so on the map for last year, and even some small areas of blue, look how things have been this calendar year on the right. While we do have some the Northwest, Southeastern Carbon County and the yellows and even some oranges, it's about 70, 95% of normal. Most of the state is in the green or better, with a large area being more than 150% of normal. And have a second set of maps here, since we talked in percentiles quite a bit. This is, as I said, it's percentiles, median in the far Northwest in some areas, with that being below median, but by and large, most of Wyoming above to well above median, with very large areas being in the highest 2 percentiles. And then compare that with last year, where the West, Southeast, and about half of Johnson County were below the median. So like I say, what a difference in year to year. And moving along here. Maybe. All right, okay, really moving along here. Standardized precipitation index, 1 and 2 months across the top, 1 year on the lower right here. Each of these show index values rather than the actual precipitation amounts, and therefore they're helpful when comparing across areas with different types of precipitation patterns. All 3 time steps show conditions being well on the wet side in most places, although I do want to point out a few short-term areas that are emerging that we'll have to be watching. Those being in southern Lincoln County, west central Bighorn County, and then the large one over in southern Campbell County there. Let's switch over now to temperature, and here we have the average minimum temperatures over the last 2 weeks. On the upper right is the actual average minimum. That's the thermometer temperature. So the northeastern 2/3 or so, along with some of the eastern plains, have seen lows in the mid-50s or higher, with the west and northwest, as well as decent sized area in Carbon, Albany counties. They're out in south central, southeast, seeing lower lows. Those being in the 40s and some even in the 30s. Earlier this week, my co-op station got down to a mere 33 Fahrenheit, so we're getting there. On the lower left is our departure from average, and the upper green, scattered areas of the Northwest, as well as the lower elevations east of the Bighorns, saw temperatures slightly above average. South central areas were roughly 3 to 6 degrees below average, with the rest of the state coming in below average, but generally by less than 3 degrees. And going over to the maximum temperature side of things, again, over the last 14 days, upper right are the actual temperatures again. Quite a bit of the northeastern 2/3, eastern plains, much of the southwest, highs in the upper 70s to upper 80s, with the cooler temperatures being the upper elevations, as you would expect, and the northwest. And even their highs were in the 60s, except for the highest reaches. In terms of a departure from average, down here on the lower left, well below average. Southern 2/3 of the state was 3 to 6 degrees below average, with a little exception carved out in Laramie Valley, which was less than 3 degrees below average. Except for another band across the far north, which was 3 to 6 degrees below average. The remainder of the north was as much as 9 degrees Fahrenheit below average. So while we had a mixture with the lows being above or below average, depending upon where you were, the highs were all below average. And finally, just a quick word on soil moisture to say that it's mostly improved statewide in the last 2 weeks, and it's been coming up quite well over the last little bit. A few spots stayed the same, and there's actually a few small areas at the extreme high end, up in that 98th to 100th percentile, that are a little worse now, but worse is relative when you're now only in the 95th or so percentile. So not much of a degradation there at all. And so with that, I will turn it over to Scott Whiteman with the USGS to update us on stream flow and surface water conditions.
Thank you, Tony. As you can see here, the state of Wyoming, a lot of the stream gauges are in that normal range, but I do have to explain that the normal range is for that 25th to 75th percentile. And there's still some in that much above normal range, which is greater than the 90th percentile. You see up on the snake up there. Next slide. And we did see some, this is the 7-day runoff for Wyoming, just a duration hydrograph. We can see some of those recent rains that helped in July there, and late July, early August. But there is it's a sharp downward trend over the last probably week or so, where we haven't had sustained moisture or those afternoon thunderstorms that we've seen. Next slide. Here's just looking at some select Wyoming stream flows, highlighting North Fork of the Shoshone River. You can see the rains on that particular hydrograph there. We're still in that normal range on that, kind of on the upper end, probably closer to that 50 percentile. Next slide. Moving east here, looking at the Belle Fourche River near Moorcroft. Although the statistics are skewed, we can see that we are in that 90th highest percentile, and then tracking right. It did exceed the 95th percentile briefly there, but it's coming back down. And those longer, drier periods that we're in right now will probably bring it back down, probably into that normal range, but only time will tell on that. Next slide. Here's looking at wouldn't be southeast corner, but close on the North Platte above Seminole Reservoir. You can see the sharp incline there in July from all the rains, and then it immediately dropped back to kind of on that same trend as it's going down, and it's a relatively sharp decline there, but still in that normal range as well, which we didn't see this last year. Next slide. Here's looking at Green River Warren Bridge, which is near Daniel, Wyoming. And you can see that same general trend of in the streamflow hydrographs there, of that sharp increase from all the rains that was pretty much statewide, and then a rapid decline with the heat and high pressure system that moved through the area. Next slide. Here's just looking at reservoirs. There were some increases, but they're still hanging on quite a few. It appears that they're moving water a little bit. I think they're evacuating a few there, but if you look at a lot of them, a lot of the reservoirs are full, and it's mainly due to the moisture we got in July. And that is it.
All right. Thanks, Scott. And continuing on with the reservoir theme, we have Liz Cresto with the Bureau of Reclamation to talk about reservoir operations.
I'm Liz Cresto from Bureau of Reclamation, and I'm out of the Wyoming area office. So we cover the Bighorn system and the North Platte. So if we start off with the Bighorn side of things, we're coming off of a wet year and have decent reservoir storage right now. So just to summarize in that upper right table, April through July runoff conditions for Bull Lake were 130% of average. Buffalo Bill was our lowest in the Bighorn system at 102% of average. And Boise received over 1 million acre feet of runoff in that April through July time period, which was 171% of average. So we were operating into the flood pool in Boise, and now that we're in August, we are below that flood pool. And you can see in the bottom table our current reservoir contents and where they are in terms of percent full and percent of average. So all our reservoirs are above average for this time of year. Next slide. In terms of outflows from Buffalo Bill, we're releasing about 1,300 CFS to the river at the Cody gauge. This is for irrigation demand. Bull Lake releases are 520 CFS, also for irrigation demand to Midville Irrigation District, and Boise releases are around 1,900 CFS. As we progress into the fall, I suspect those flows will start decreasing over the coming weeks. So switching over to the North Platte system, they had a good runoff year of 1.3 million acre feet of runoff, which is higher than the last 3 years. In terms of reservoir contents, it's a little above average at overall 114% of average, which equates to 67% full. Next slide for releases. Releases below Seminole and Cordes Reservoir are 1,400 CFS. Below Gray Reef, 1,600 CFS. Below Glendo is 4,700 CFS. Below Guernsey is 4,450 CFS. I do anticipate as we go into the tail end of the irrigation season, those flows will be stepping down probably somewhere in that mid to late September timeframe. I put that link in red that you can go to our website and check for water order changes. That's where we post any changes to the outflows of our reservoirs. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Yep.
We now have Michelle Hubbard with the State Engineer's Office to talk about the status of water rights administration in Wyoming.
Hello, my name is Michelle Hubbard. I am with the Interstate Streams Division of the State Engineer's Office, and I'm just going to briefly go over any administrative calls we have. And this is just kind of an informational slide of our 4 divisions within the state, and then the representative superintendents for each divisions are listed in the 4 corners. Next slide. So in Division 1, there was no change in the administration from last month. In July, there were 2 calls placed on the Little Laramie and Tribes to the priority dates of 1882 and 1881, but no change largely within Division 1. In Division 2, there was there we go. It is just a little slow today. Everything's a little slow, and that's fine. In Division 2, there is a call in the North Fork Powder River. However, this is just for a irrigation district, I believe, to shepherd water from storage to head gates. So it's not due to shortage. I don't believe Division 2 will go under administrative calls for this entire water year. Again, that's subject to change, but so far, if it's not happening in the end of August, it's kind of crazy. All right, Division 3, there was a call placed on July 31st on the Graybull River in districts 8 and 16. And I guess I should explain that, and Tony's highlighting it. We have the districts under a regulation highlighted in red in their respective divisions. And so that priority is going back to January of 1913. And last but not least, Division 4 is a little drier than the rest of the state. Those first 2 calls were done earlier and from last meeting, but there's a call on the Smiths Fork River in District 4, as well as the Blacks Fork River in District 15. Calls number 3, 4, and 5 are new for this month. On July 27th, there was a call on the East Fork of the Smiths Fork River in District 4 to a priority of 1910. On July 31st, there was a call on Teton Creek and Tribes, and that is to meet the Roxana Decree and its requirements. And then on August 2nd, there was a call on Smiths Fork and Bear River, which is being regulated to monitor the diversions per the Bear River Compact. So that is, and then I think the next slide again is just the superintendents, which Division 1 is Corey Reinhardt, Division 2 is David Schroeder, Division 3, Joshua Fredrickson, and Division 4, Kevin Payne. And that is, I believe, all I have for you.
That's it. Thanks, Michelle.
Yep.
And next up, we have Jerry Swanson with the National Weather Service up in Riverton to give us the latest weather forecasts and outlooks. Jerry?
All righty, so this slide here basically shows the year of the hazards, what type of hazards we expect during the different months of the year. And you can see there in the middle of August, we're just toward the end of the severe thunderstorm, a tornado warning, and any flash flooding due to that. Still kind of in the middle toward the, later into the fire weather. But luckily with the non-drought situation going on, we're not having a lot of fire weather issues, but that does extend out through at least mid-September. And you can see the whisker, actually, it can go out as far as November. And then next, in a couple of months, we'll get back into the high wind stuff, but hopefully not as high wind as we had last winter, because we definitely had a lot of high wind. But we are getting into, like I said, the end of the severe weather time frame now, and just continuing fire weather. Unfortunately, tomorrow's going to be hot and dry and windy, so a little problematic, but we're keeping an eye on all of that. Go ahead. Next slide. Yep. So this slide here is basically shows the accumulation of thunderstorm, severe thunderstorm, and tornado warnings that have been issued in the entire state of Wyoming for the year. And you can see 2023, we're up there running second place with 487 severe and tornado warnings for the year. Just 2019 with 507 had a higher number. And you can see the main cluster down in the bottom of the screen, that's where the normal numbers fall. But 18, 19, and of course this year definitely higher as far as the tornado and severe thunderstorm warnings go. Go ahead. Next slide, please. Okay, and this one is basically the same thing. It shows the numbers for the months, and you can see May, we actually were not a record, but we were running about third for the month of May. But June, 219 issued, definitely second place there. July was a little bit less. You can see where that 2020 or that 2019 there at 287. And luckily in August, we're running fairly much lower on the scale with the 28. So we'll see how that goes. And then September, hopefully won't see too many in September, but you can definitely see June and July where our numbers were definitely pretty strong. And like I said, running in second place in the years of record. Go ahead, next slide. All right, so here's our precipitation forecast for the next 7 days. You can see the nice blue and colors in the west side and the south. We are looking at a little bit of monsoon weather to start moving up into the area later today, definitely tomorrow and through the weekend. So the western and southern portions definitely going to see the most of it. You can see the gray area is a little bit less for Bighorn Basin and over in Fremont, or in Johnson and Carbon counties, a little bit on the drier side. But most of the state will be seeing some of that monsoon moisture over the weekend, and that will help a lot. And really, it's going to be, a lot of it will depend on where the showers are. Sometimes we get the heavier showers and we get those bullseyes of higher numbers. But dry mostly, other than the west and southwest areas until over the weekend. And then the south, you can see the southeast there with the green is going to get some decent weather too with this monsoon. Next slide. All right, and here's the 6 to 10 day outlook. So you can see on the left there, that high pressure over the Midwest is definitely still giving us lots of good temperatures. So above normal temperatures for sure for the 6 to 10 day outlook. And you can see that monsoon on the right-hand side with the precipitation outlook. You can see that monsoon precipitation coming up. And of course, Hurricane Hillary expected to make landfall in California. That's going to add to the normal monsoon. We're thinking that's going to come up and give us a lot more moisture as well, especially over in the west, but definitely above normal for the state in the 6 to 10 day outlook. Next slide. 8 to 14 day, that high pressure is going to shift a little bit as the monsoon kind of kicks in. We are still looking at above normal temperatures, but not quite as strong a signal for above normal, except for the southeast corner of Wyoming. And then over on the right, the precipitation, once again, still continuing a little bit of that monsoon. So still seeing the above normal precipitation for Wyoming for the 8 to 14 day outlook. Next slide. So I skipped the 1 month because it looks almost similar to the 3 month outlook. And you can see looking for above normal temperatures for most of Wyoming, just equal chances up in the very northeast corner. but definitely a little bit above normal for temperatures. As far as precipitation goes, for the 3-month outlook, we're not seeing any clear signals for anything. So we're saying basically near normal, equal chances we could see above or below over the 3-month outlook. And this is real similar to the 1 month as well. Above normal with equal chances for precipitation numbers. Next slide. All right, we can go ahead and move on.
All right, thanks, Jerry. And from Bureau of Land Management, our next presenter is Rebecca Hurd to talk about wildland fire outlooks and conditions.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Hurd. I'm a fire planner for the High Desert District and High Plains District in Wyoming for the BLM. I'm actually located in Pineville. But before I get into conditions around the state, I just wanted to touch on what we look at to determine fire danger and our field conditions. So we have the live fuel moisture as well as the dead fuel moisture. Those live fuel moistures, generally values of 120% or less are receptive to fire, and at about or below 100%, that's when we have locally identified our live fuel moistures to be critical. We have sample sites across the state, and usually those are sampled once a month during fire season. What I'll talk about in the next couple of slides is the dead fuel moisture, specifically that 1,000-hour fuel moisture, those larger fuels, and those are computed on a 7-day average and look at precipitation duration and temperature and humidity ranges. 1,000-hour fuels are really a slower trending index, so they give us a good sense of where we are in the week, month. We also commonly use an index called ERC to evaluate fire danger and fuel conditions. ERC is just really that available energy at the flaming front measured by BTUs. And this index takes into account environmental conditions as well as fuels conditions, both live and dead fuel moisture. Next slide. All right, so the graphic on the left, that's just really a map of those are called predictive service areas. And what those are grouped remote automated weather stations that are similar in weather and climate. So the first one we'll talk about is that Shoshone area. And here we have a graphic of the ERCs, and you can see that yep, that was about last month, and it took a dive when we got all that rain and we're slowly trending up. But you can see that gray line is average, and we are still below average in terms of ERCs in the Shoshone area. Next slide. This is a 1,000-hour fuel moisture, and you can see it increased significantly when we got all that rain and moisture and is trending down, but still above average. Next slide. Moving over into the Bighorn Mountains, similar scenario. We had the wet weather, and ERCs took a dip, and then we're slowly trending back up, but still below average. Same scenario for our 1,000-hour fuel moistures. We were at about average, and then got the precipitation and peaked out at about 18, and then slowly trending down. Moving over into Devil's Tower, similar situation, except the ERCs look almost to be trending at average. And then 1,000-hour fuel moistures, similar conditions, still above average there. Next slide. So down in the Medicine Bow part of the state, little bit different story, although a little bit different in that we're not below average, we're right at about average, but still you can see where that precipitation affected both the ERCs and the 1,000 hours, which were right about average. And moving into the southwest corner of the state, similar story. ERCs are below average, and as well as 1,000-hour fuel moistures. All right, so I added this slide just to kind of paint the picture of fire occurrence from 2022 as you know, we move into 2023. Disregard the colors here. This is a snapshot from our fire reporting system. So these are the fires from January 1st to August 16th. And you can kind of get a sense of, you know, where our fires have been concentrated, I guess in 2022, and now where they, you know, aren't happening in 2023, specifically around the Laramie Range yet. So we've just had a slower than, I would say slower than normal fire year. 2022, I would consider normal, and we're just not seeing the amount of starts, even as we did in 2022. Next slide. All right, so fire size in 2022 as compared to 2023. We've had, you know, a lot less fire starts. 2023 or 2022, excuse me, we had 269 fire starts as opposed to this year 151. And the other thing I wanted to key in on is when there were several fires, well, 3 fires in particular, that grew to be, you know, between 1,000 and 5,000 acres, and one that was 5,000 to 10,000 acres. And this year we just have not seen that. Yeah, greener conditions, and haven't had the wind events. Next slide. So I thought I'd just draw our attention to nationally where we sit, and you can see Wyoming is just relatively green. The purple squares are new incidents. It looks like we had a couple yesterday. And the named fires are those larger fires that are over 100 acres or are being managed for resource benefit. So we have one of those fires that exists on the landscape down in the southern winds right now. But otherwise, we are very quiet in terms of fire activity. Next slide. All right, so as far as the outlet goes, we're sitting at normal. This is issued at the 1st of the month, so it's a little bit dated, but it makes sense. Almost, you know, could almost be trending to below normal. The areas of activity are obviously, you can see the red in the Pacific Northwest, down around the Four Corners area, and then in Texas. And in September, more of the same. Also that Minnesota, Wisconsin region continuing to be above normal. And it looks like Alaska drops off in September. Hawaii stays active both August and September. Next slide. And you can see there in October, parts of the Pacific Northwest return to normal, and more of, Texas returns to normal. Hawaii still stays above normal into November. Those areas in the Pacific Northwest, drop off, and as well as some areas in the eastern US and around Minnesota, Wisconsin. But yeah, as far as fire activity, normal to almost below normal, as we've seen with current ignitions and fire growth, just not amounting to much. That's all I have.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks.
And our featured topic this month is the Conditions Monitoring Observer Report System, affectionately known as CMOR. And today we have with us Kelly Smith from the National Drought Mitigation Center to tell us all about it. Go ahead, Kelly.
Hey, thanks, Tony. There we go. It's my first slide. CMOR reports are very much in context of the U.S. Drought Monitor. They are one source of information that the authors look at when they're making the map, and along with precipitation, temperature, fire weather, hydrology, tons of other things that Tony and others have been talking about. CMOR is a chance for people's observations, their on-the-ground experience of conditions, to be factored into making the map. Next slide.
I'm trying.
So it's very much the point of this, the point of that past slide is to show you that it's very much a three-way process. It's got to work for the people on the ground who are submitting reports. It's got to work for Tony Bergantino and Wendy Kelly and the other people who are doing assessment at the state level and perhaps feeding decisions to state agencies. And then it's got to work for the U.S. Drought Monitor authors. So it's a three-way conversation. Next slide. So this is the landing page. It's go.unl.edu/CMOR_drought. From there, you can really get started and do everything. You can submit reports on a web-based form, or you can get going with the app and do it all on a mobile form. The image over on the right is our newest addition to what we're offering. It's a mobile-friendly map of CMOR reports. The dashboard is a little bit painful to look at on mobile, but it works really slick on the app. I was actually pleased. I didn't even think it was possible, but yeah, I think it works pretty well. Okay, next slide. So just a couple of highlights. Like any other app, the first time you use it takes a little bit more attention than all the other times. Unlike most apps, you do not have to have a username and a login, but that actually means that you have to do some workarounds. It's not feasible to do that with the Esri system. So be sure after you download the app that you click on continue without signing in rather than going for one of those other sign-in options. If you tell it allow while using app, allow your location, it will be able to pinpoint your location pretty closely. And you don't have to allow that. I'll show you some other options in a minute. The one other thing to know is that the first time you use the app, first download the Survey 123 app, then point your camera at the QR code or navigate to the survey, and it will prompt you to download the survey if it's not already in the app. But it's hard to download the survey, or you can't download the survey from inside the app the first time. You have to download it from outside the app. And that has to do with the fact that we're using this for crowdsourcing and not as a signed in application. Once you get it working, and I've probably made it sound harder than it is, but once you get it working, it's really pretty slick after that first time. Okay, next. So the first widget that you come to, after you choose a language, you can choose currently Spanish or English are the options. it asks you to choose a location. If you're not using the app, like if you're doing it from a desktop, or if you don't want to allow it to pinpoint your location, you can just type in the location in that search bar at the top, Lincoln, Nebraska, or Lancaster County, Nebraska. And in most cases, the city or the county would be close enough. It might be more problematic in one of those huge counties in Arizona. Maybe there you'd want to use your the city name. But there are a variety of different ways. Probably the easiest is just use the app, let it do it for you, or you can touch the compass, and depending on where you are, it might locate it pretty evenly. Note that if you're using a VPN on a desktop system, you cannot let it automatically find your location, because then it will be some random location around the globe. And then after you do the location widget, there's a location quality control block where we ask you to select a state and your county. And that's just to prevent, so we can spot and correct the worst user error. Sometimes it'll end up, someone will position a marker in a different state or in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and this way we can at least get it to the right county. But this quality control step will not actually position the marker on the map. It just lets us fix it if it comes through wrong. Okay, next one, please. The default date is the current day. You can backdate it if you've got a photo from a different date, or if you want to file a report based on something you saw a couple days ago. And while we're talking about time, I will just mention that the ideal interval for submitting reports might be weekly in order to participate in the drought monitor process. Maybe every Monday morning. That's what North Dakota has done very successfully. And that way, or over the weekend, that way it's there for the assessment team when they provide recommendations early in the week, typically on a Tuesday, to drought monitor authors. And reporting at regular intervals helps build credibility and a track record. It lets people compare what you've said about landscape conditions when you're not in crisis. Sometimes people are a little bit skeptical about kind of this crisis reporting. And yes, there's on the landing page, in answer to the question that just popped up, on the landing page, there's actually fact sheets that will walk you through this. If you choose the one that says in English, that'll give you the step-by-step process. Okay, next slide. Then there's this 7-point dry to wet scale. Some of you may recognize this. This is the exact same wording and scale that is used by COCORA's condition monitoring reports. They were so successful that we adopted that same scale. And this also provides a common field so that we can map CMOR reports and COCORA's condition monitoring reports, according to one variable. Okay, next slide. Then there's a question that asks people, it kind of puts their experience in context, like how is this a 1 in 3 year event, a 1 in 20 year event? And that relates to the drought monitor percentiles. And we're not currently doing anything with this, but as we gather more data, I think we might try to express it in drought monitor percentiles. Next slide, please. The first block of questions then that you come to, of condition questions, have to do with when you're reporting on conditions that are normal or wet, because we want people, as I mentioned, to report year-round in all dry, wet, and normal conditions at all times of year, to build up a track record of what things look like and what you're seeing in those conditions. So this gives you several things to check off that just may describe normal. Okay, next slide. Then you get to impact checklists. Would you go ahead and click? I think I might have animation on here. Sorry about that. Yeah, there you go. When you click on, in this case, this shows you what happens if you've opened up that first little triangle accordion on report crop production impact. It gives you several different possible impacts that you might want to check off. And would you click one more time, please? I thought I took all the animation out. If you click on the other option, it opens a free text field so that you can fill in whatever else you might be seeing. Thanks. Next slide. At the bottom of the crop condition reporting are these special scales that are comparable to what the U.S. Department of Agriculture uses. One asks you to rate crop conditions on a 5-point scale from very poor to excellent. And another asks you to talk about planting status. Is it normal, early, late, and also what do you anticipate for harvest status? And later on, you can actually pull up each of these individually on the map, and I will have time to just show you the highlights of how that can work. Next slide, please. For reporting on range conditions, there is a similar list of impacts and then also a scale for range conditions from very poor to excellent. Next slide, please. Photos are one of probably the most valuable things that the CMOR system offers, according to drought monitor authors. That's one of the things that they most appreciate about it. It's ideal. We actually have a couple of observers around the country who take pictures of the same field and stream or stream every week and upload them. So they really are doing the ideal building a track record of what does this place look like in all different conditions. We do appreciate any caption or description information that tells us why a photo is showing drought or whatever it's showing, but how are you interpreting that? Because we may not know, if I'm in a different part of the country, I may not have any idea of whether it's browner than normal this time of year. And another good option is to upload contrast photos. Here's what this looked like in a wet year. Here's what it looks like in a dry year, or even refer to earlier photos that you have previously uploaded. And a good practice is to take a picture of the resource, namely rangeland, as opposed to cattle that may be on the rangeland. Not everybody would know how to interpret what they're seeing related to livestock, and we don't want that to become contentious. Next slide, please. Then there are a few questions related to identity. We ask people to identify their role, whether they're extension, farm service agent, a field worker, an outdoor enthusiast, anything else, kind of by checkbox. And then we ask people to choose a display name, and that could be your real name. It could be the name of your ranch. It could be something completely made up. It's having a display name as a way that you can sort on the dashboard. You can sort or filter by display name. So if you just want to see your reports, it's right there. You can type in your display name. You do need to be sure to type it in the same way every time. But that's been pretty convenient, and a lot of people have been using that. It took us a while to get that down because we don't want to display, not everybody wants their real name to be displayed. We do collect name and email in case we need to go back and contact people, or we would share that information typically with Tony and Wendy and people who are involved in assessing drought, but we don't publicly display it. We are protecting people from being publicly identified if they don't want to be, but for internal management purposes, that information is available and shared. Next slide, please. So this is what the default view of the dashboard looks like. You're basically, as soon as you hit submit, the report appears on the dashboard. It's a year-to-date view, although you can see across the top that you can go back to past years for different views. You can read individual reports either by clicking on a dot or by scrolling through, especially after you've filtered. Nobody's going to want to scroll through 2,000 reports, but that panel over on the right will let you scroll through reports. And you see a timeline down at the bottom. This is pretty typical. We see for the country as a whole more reports during the growing season. And that's usually the time of the greatest interest in the drought monitor. So that all makes sense. Next slide, please. So if you're actually trying to find your own dot on the map, you can drill down. So far, there have only been 6 reports from Wyoming, at least as of a couple days ago. There was only one that had photos. It was from someone, Bighorn County FSA reporting. They had uploaded several photos that actually looked like they were at a time of day with really good light. For whatever reason, it was really interesting lighting. So you can see I've used the dashboard to drill down to the state of Wyoming, and that's quick and easy. I think that's it for this slide. Next slide, please. One thing I wanted to point out on this tab that says Dashboard 2018 to yesterday, that lets you look at the entire period of record, which for CMOR started in 2018. And the reason it says through yesterday is because we have an overnight process where we add the US Drought Monitor status. So over on the right, you can see, in addition to all the questions that someone has filled out, we've done a spatial join and we say US Drought Monitor intensity none in the case of the particular report number 1 that it's focusing on. So that's an interesting detail that a lot of times people are looking for. Okay, next slide, please. When you get the first couple of tabs are dashboards, and then we have what's called web apps. And the difference is that dashboards are good for quick filtering, and web apps really, really let you get down to as absolutely granular as you want to. And I have the first view of it has, when you first click to it, the attributes table is open, and this options at the top left of the table will let you write a custom query, like you can filter it by state or any other thing that's on the survey, or even a use of a particular word, and you can download a CSV. So that's actually a really powerful and helpful tool. And that exists for every year, because the surveys have been a little bit different each year, but you can actually search more years than once by using the calendar filter to change the dates. Just be careful that you don't turn on too many things at once, because then it gets really slow. Okay, next slide. This is what it looks like when I have drilled down to just show poor and very poor range conditions. And I don't think this is this year's map. I'm not actually sure when this map is from, but this is what's possible, just showing one certain range condition. Next slide, please. I'm just highlighting in these last few slides, just a few of the map capabilities. So we do have it set up so that you can look at the past. You can compare any past week's drought monitor with that week of CMOR reports. But because the drought monitor is only valid for 1 week at a time, make sure that if you turn on the US Drought Monitor Archive, that you're working with the time slider down at the bottom. You turn it on with that little clock widget in the lower left, and then you can scoot the time selection with the time slider. It's kind of common sense, but it will be very messy if you try to display more than 1 week of the drought monitor at once. Okay, next slide, please. The funnel icon has some really useful tools. It lets you drill down to a state or county. You can sort by that COCO-RAS scale, or the scale we borrowed, the dry to wet scale. You can look at only the dry side or the neutral side or the wet side or whatever you're interested in. And you can also sort only to impacts that reports that have photos with them on that. Okay, next slide, please. The little 4 square option at the top means find all the sectors here. So this is where you can sort by reports that have checked off impacts within any of those different blocks of questions. You can also access crop and range conditions and the planting and harvest status, and the crop, like I said, crop and range conditions there. That's where to find that detail. Next slide, please. I think I've only got a couple left. This is what it looks like when someone has turned on one single impact under health. We only want to see where people have reported air quality or dust or pollen. So this is an example of what that looks like. Next slide, please. The wrench icon will let you write custom queries. Like in this case, I've written in the word wheat, and you can find, it'll pull up any report that use that word. I think that was my last slide then, besides my name. Next slide. So thank you all very much for bearing with me, and I hope that we end up seeing more reports from Wyoming. Let me know if you've got any questions that I can answer.
Thank you, Kelly. I can't stress enough the importance of these reports that go into the CMOR system. We look at them all the time when we're coming up with recommendations to the national authors. So thank you for that. And thanks to all our presenters today too. And I'll just quickly pass the baton to Wendy Kelly to take us into Q&A.